Welcome to the Managing Violence podcast, where we talk all things self-defense, violence prevention, and aggression management. My name is Joe Saunders. I'm your host. Let's go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Joe Saunders here. Thank you so much for joining us for Season 2, Episode 2. I apologize for the delay. As those of you who follow us on Facebook will have seen, we had some technical issues in that my laptop outright died, and I had to wait a little bit of time to pick up a new system and get it all set up so that I could edit this show and get it up and running. So because of that, if you're listening to this as it comes out, there will be 2 episodes dropping this weekend. Which is just my way of trying to make it up to those of you who were hanging out for a new episode after Season 2, Episode 1 dropped a couple of weeks ago. So without further ado, we have Matt Stait today. Matt is a UK martial arts instructor. He's got a fantastic story, coming from a bullied kid with asthma through to a champion martial artist, a bouncer, a bodyguard, and now an accomplished author. He's a lot of fun to talk to, and we share some good banter and some common experience. So now I do just want to make a note that we did have some connection issues early on in the recording. So please bear with us through those. We do manage to clean that up as we go. So look, the first 10 to 15 minutes or so can be a little bit scratchy, but stick with it and it gets better. So let's get into it with Matt Stait. All right, welcome to the show, Matt. Thank you very much for joining me here on the Managing Violence podcast for Season 2. It's an interview we started lining up at the end of Season 1, and we hope to get it done. And here we are. We've managed to get you in as one of the first couple of guests for Season 2. So I'm glad we finally got you on board.
Yes, I've been looking forward to it, my friend.
Excellent. Now, Matt, you've got a very, very interesting story, and I think this is what made you stand out as a potential guest when I was going through the possibilities for this season. Not just a martial artist, not just a person who's written books on martial arts, and not just a bouncer or a doorman, and not just a bodyguard, and not just a kid who dealt with bullying, but all of those things and more. So you're not as high profile as some of the guests that I've had on, or some of the guests that are coming this season, which is great because it gives me an opportunity to really share with the listeners a story they may not have heard before. So, mate, the floor is yours. I'd love to hear about your childhood and how you got into this crazy world of learning how to manage violence.
It's quite a long, sort of convoluted story, but I'll sort of give you some of the highlights. As a child, I went through a divorce with my parents, which led to a number of different moves to different areas, which led to always, being the new kid in a new school, which created a lot of bullying, which created a lot of problems trying to sort of fit in, make friends, get involved with these social groups. And so that was always difficult as an outsider. But then couple that with the unfortunate situation in my home life, which also included a lot of physical violence, it meant that as a kid, I had quite a lot of violence thrust upon me, and in my late teens I was actually diagnosed with PTSD because of that. But what that actually did, it's a double-edged sword, because as much as that was a difficult sort of way to go through your childhood, on the other side of the coin, what it actually did is it gave me a great set of tools to actually understand violence and be able to manipulate that to work within the remits of what I ended up doing. So when you talk about martial arts, there's a whole lot of martial artists out there that, and I'm going to speak frankly just because of the conversation that we're having, where you've got a lot of martial artists out there that are pretending violence as opposed to trying to understand violence. So they make the violence fit their view of what violence should be, not they change their view to fit what violence actually is. And so obviously coming from a place where real violence was thrust upon me for many, many years, and I had no say in that, and I just had to learn to deal with that. That was actually quite a blessing, in the sense that when it came to actually dealing with real violence, I wasn't stepping from this place of not having any knowledge on it. I wasn't coming from a place of I practice one thing but it's another. I actually found that all of those years of going through that had actually given me a very good education and grounding in what real violence is, what real violence does to the mind and the body, and how how to manipulate that both in myself and in other people. So it actually gave me some really good skills moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you and I have exchanged comments on Facebook a little bit over the last few months around that subject, and it's always interesting. I don't mind throwing the cat amongst the pigeons and upsetting martial artists, and especially those that have never been in a real fight that teach people how to fight. Look, there's a lot of people that mean very well and probably teach good product, but my concern is if you haven't actually been around violence and you're just trusting that the person you learned from is teaching you the right thing. I mean, how good is your filter? How well are you able to distinguish good information from poor information if you haven't got a grounding in the subject matter? So I think there are ways around it, but the best material I've ever come across has come from people that have lived it.
And yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Obviously, there are some caveats, because I don't think, as people rightly pointed out, I don't think you have to be, sort of have to go through certain things. You don't have to be hit by a car to know how to, fix the medical issues regarding being involved in a car accident, as an example. However, when you're talking about especially the mental aspects of violence, the psychological aspects of violence, all the things that really matter, because the physical is just the superficial. The physical is the easy bit. So all of that, I think that has to come from a place of knowledge, because people that are just spouting second, third hand information parrot fashion really don't understand the nuances of what's being discussed, and that then can create a lot of problems, because when people actually find that they need these skills, they're misunderstanding what those skills actually are. And that brings us back to where I said actually that I'd actually got a lot of good information from my time going through that as a younger person, because I learned a lot of the psychological aspects of that before I'd even hit my teens, and I'd learned what fear does and how fear affects people, and how to deal with that, how not to deal with that. I'd actually confronted a lot of those things before I'd even started martial arts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're saying is correct. It's not so much about the physical techniques. I mean, anyone can learn the physical techniques and parrot them well enough and teach them well enough as any other physical movement. But it's the ability to know what to do with that stress and that adrenaline and that fear and the emotion and the complete dissolution of your own sense of self when you don't act the way you think you will act. All that terror and that realization that you're actually human and that you might actually be not quite as brave as you thought you were.
No, absolutely.
That's very hard to deal with, especially when you've spent your whole you spent 10 years of your life fantasizing about the time the bully's going to kick sand in your face, and then you realize the bully's actually really big and he's still really scary.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I always say that there are actually 3 fights to any fight, and that's something that I stress quite highly in my own training for people, because one without the other isn't a complete whole, and so you'll get guys that will teach just the physical aspect, but they have no understanding of the legalities of what they're teaching. So as an example, you'll get guys that are teaching chokes and arm breaks and gouge their eye out and all things like that. But then what they're not telling people is that, if you suddenly rise to that level of violence and it's not completely necessary under the circumstances, then, you're going to find yourself in prison, in jail. You're going to find yourself losing your livelihood and your family. The repercussions of that are immense. And then you've got the other side of it, which is you've got your psychological fight, which is the first fight, then the physical, then the legal. And the first fight is obviously, really, really important, because if you haven't got the right mindset and the right capability to understand what you're doing and actually propel yourself to do so, because punching somebody in the face is much harder than most people realize. When you're in a comfortable setting with friends, in your specific outfit, in your specific place, hitting focus pads and things like that, then it's very easily to rationalize. But when you have to instigate violence against somebody who's really going to hurt you if you get it wrong, and there's a consequence straight away to that action, that's a completely different frame of mind. That's a completely different set of thinking skills.
Absolutely. And and then you are thinking about, well, what has led up to this? Am I justified? Am I not justified? What's the outcome? And what's the long-term repercussions of this? Assuming that you're of sound mind when you make that decision. But there's a lot that goes into that, and I know we'll touch on this. As we have a shared background working in nightclubs, and you'd like to think most of the time that going hands on with someone, you're in a calm state of mind. But there's a lot of factors that go into that decision about what do we do with this particular situation, and what's my next 6 months or 12 months or 5 years going to look like if I take this too far. So
absolutely. I was going to say that there has to be an understanding that you can't worry about the next fight until you've got through the fight that you're already in. So as an example of that, there's no point in worrying about the legal consequences if by worrying about those you're going to end up getting kicked silly and end up in a coma. And there's no point in worrying about the physical side of the fight if you haven't actually got the psychological tools to mentally put yourself in a position where you can use those. And so you have to take each fight as a separate entity and deal with that first. But you have to. But if you're teaching it, if you're in any way, trying to give others advice on this particular subject, then we need to take all three fights as part of the whole. That's really where I'm coming from on that. But you can't let one. Take more importance than the other before the other fight is won. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely. So just backtracking to your story a little bit, how did the progression go? I mean, obviously you're a kid that was dealing with the violence on multiple fronts. How did you end up in martial arts? How did that happen?
Well, I started touching on it as a kid. I mean, I like a lot of people, I saw the old sort of kung fu series on the television and Bruce Lee and things like that, and fell in love with the whole idea of having these magical superpowers that were actually achievable. And as a kid, seeing that, especially given the life I was leading, it seemed like a way out. It seemed like a way that I could, defend myself against all of this things going on. And so that was the initial attraction, the idea of being this, superhero that could fight off 20 bad guys. Obviously, we all know the reality of that now, but back then that was the belief and the assumption. And so I tested out a few little things. I went to a few things. It was pretty hit and miss. I do talk about this in some of the books, and eventually I managed to find a place that were through more luck than judgment. I mean, I didn't understand the quality that I'd stumbled across, but I found a good karate gym, which was Wadaru Karate at the time, run by a couple of guys who were extremely knowledgeable, who are extremely knowledgeable, and they were gracious enough to sort of accept me, and I literally learned the foundations of everything going forward from that. And it wasn't just learning the martial arts at that point. I mean, that's something, again, I really, really stress, is that at the time, as a young man, I'd lost my father to suicide. He'd committed suicide. I didn't have any role models. I'd gone through all of this family history where I didn't really understand, how things should work. And so I was lost in a lot of ways, and martial arts gave me positivity. It gave me a reason to sort of keep plodding on at something. It taught me self-discipline, made a lot of friends. It created in me a need to learn, new things. So it gave me way more than just punching somebody in the face. I mean, that's the thing that people jump to when they talk about martial arts, and they instantly think it's a physical skill that you're getting. It wasn't. At that time, I was being taught how to be a decent human being, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the elements of martial arts that we can never. Parents ask me all the time, "What's the best martial art for Billy?" Because he's getting picked on at school, and to be honest, it's whatever he's going to enjoy. There's some that are better physically than others, but at the end of the day, if the kid picks up a hobby that they enjoy, that gets them social, that gives them confidence, that improves their fitness and coordination, the bullying can sometimes just resolve itself based on that. It's no point in me saying, well, he has to go do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it's more realistic than Taekwondo. If Billy loves doing Taekwondo, and if he's going to love doing jumping spinning kicks, and that's what gives him a sense of confidence, and his friends are going to think it's cool, then yeah, by all means, go do that. As opposed, we're not trying to make him the most combat effective kid in the world. He doesn't have to be. He's a little bit more confident in how he handles himself. And I think the value of martial arts is so much more than the physical techniques, and especially for a young man like yourself who needed that little bit of extra guidance and a bit of positive structure. So moving on from that, you end up devoting a good chunk of your life to martial arts, and then you end up deciding to become a nightclub doorman. Obviously all this is in your first book, but how does that decision go in your head? Do you have any reservations about getting back into a world of violence, or is it a fairly logical progression for you?
Well, it was again, it was a series of events. I mean, all these things aren't they? It's kind of strange how the world sort of plays out. It doesn't, your world doesn't suddenly flip on its head overnight. It's a series of incremental sort of changes that lead you down this pathway. And I know I've been doing the martial arts. I've been doing various forms of martial arts. I've been doing well in competition. I've been experimenting a little bit with different types of things. So by this stage, I'm young, I'm fit, I'm very strong, I feel very capable, but I'm also aware of the limitations with regards to the competition style fighting isn't actually fighting, and also that just need, especially as a young man, that little ego thing, whatever it is, can I actually do what I think I can do? And I always say to people, it's a bit like having a bright red sports car that can do like 200 miles an hour, but you're just not allowed to do 200 miles an hour. You're always left sort of wondering.
Yeah.
And so I'm not suggesting that I'm a bright red sports car, but what I am saying is, being young, being fit, being capable, winning competitions and feeling like I was pretty okay with that. I wanted to test the boundaries of what I thought I knew, and that leaves you then with a couple of choices, doesn't it? And so it was a case of, well, do I want to basically go out and pick fights in the street? And my father did some of that in his day. He liked to drink, and he was known for being a bit of a street fighter and stuff. He was a big guy, and so did I want to take that route? And then I thought about that, and I thought about the martial arts training that I'd done so far, and that was a pretty quick no, because that went against everything that we was trying to get from the martial arts. So going out and causing people injury was not the answer. So it was okay, right? So we'll scrap that. And then you're like, competition. Well, I do the competition anyway, and but none of the competition is giving me exactly what I need, because it's all faked and staged. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's faked and staged as in it's not real, because it's real, of course it is. And the skills that these guys have, I mean, you take a top level Thai fighter or MMA fighter or BJJ guy, they have got some top level skills, and they are awesome in their field, but that's not the outside arena, and those skills don't always transition across, or if they do, they need to be modified a little bit to do so. And again, sometimes I get into trouble by saying these things, but I've seen it firsthand. I've been on the doors many years, and I've seen very high level martial artists come very unstuck quite quickly. So I've seen that myself, and so there was that side of it, the competition side, which I then said, okay, right, so perhaps that's not the way forward. And then that really only did leave the doors, in the sense that I had a reason to do it. I had a good reason to do it. I was being paid for the privilege, but also I was actually, tasked with looking after the club and the safety of the people within it, so on and so forth. And so I had a reason, which was, saving the good guys from the bad guys kind of thing. And so that gave me that, if you like, moral justification. But then on top of that, it soon became a very interesting social experiment and physical experiment, because I found out very quickly that all those years that had gone by had actually given me an edge with regards to conflict management, with regards to dealing with violence, because a lot of people just end up falling apart at the very smell of it, because when it gets real like that, most people aren't used to it. And so I found that I actually had a really, I was good at it. I had a natural talent for it. And that was interesting, because I don't just mean like the physical skills. I mean, I had a natural talent for handling violent, difficult people. And that was quite an interesting thing. And again, quite seductive, yourself, having done door work, it is a seductive lifestyle that you can sort of fall into. And so I did, I ended up becoming immersed in that for a few years.
Yeah, it certainly can be. And I've made the comment before that you tend to live for that 1% of your shift where everything turns to hell. It's not 99% thinking about how sore your feet are and how cold it is, and 1% running to wherever the action's happening, and then the rest of the time you're sort of coming down off that high and then waiting for the next one. And when you go nights on end without one of those, you start to question why you're doing the job still. It's what you say is correct with the managing conflict. It became a game for me. Similar to you, I got in to see whether my martial arts actually worked, and to be honest, part of the motivation for me was I hadn't grown up in violence, but I'd grown up training for it, and I wasn't really sure how I'd deal with it. I wasn't. It scared me a little bit, and that was probably a good motivation to go and do it, because I thought anything that scares me that much is probably worth exploring. And yeah, I made the comment in a show last season that my first shift I signed on at 7 p.m. and I was in my first fight at 7:05. So, well, welcome to reality. But
yes, yeah.
It did become a game for me, because I started to, how well can I psychologically manipulate this situation to make him think it was his idea to leave, or to game my way out of this particular situation and make them think that they won. And that became a whole new martial art for me, and it's something I've started talking about this year, is communication as a martial art, and how we use that to strategically achieve our ends, and both parties think that they won, but you know that you controlled the situation. So moving on from that, so you spent a bit of time on the doors, and then you started. So at what point did you start teaching martial arts? Was this concurrently while you were working the doors, or did you transition, or how did that work?
No, it's sort of again, it was a sort of organic growth kind of thing. I mean, when we were talking about the doors, just to touch back on that, I mean, I think you're absolutely right with the sense that that should be almost a standalone martial art, because learning how to trigger, manipulate, and get people to do what it is you want them to do using nothing but their subconscious mind is a very, very deep art form in itself, and that's something that, you know, the better you become at that, the easier it is to deal with everything else, because you don't have to go around sort of smacking people around then, and also you don't have to get into an argument about it, because they actually think they've won from that argument, they've won from that position, but in actual fact they haven't, and they've been manipulated into making a decision they didn't even realize they've done. And that's great, you know, and that's a very deep an interesting sort of sideline to door work and security work. In fact, anything where that kind of stuff is required. So but then moving from that, I've been training for a while and doing various things, and long story short, as with a lot of clubs, you get asked as you progress through the rankings, you get asked to help out with classes, you get asked to maybe take a class now and again, and then before you know what's going on, you're an assistant instructor, and then you're taking your own classes, and then it moves on from there. So I did my first I was billed as an assistant instructor. It was either 94 or 96. It was quite a long time ago. I can't remember exactly, but it was one of those, 94 or 96. And that was where I first started as a recognized instructor.
Yeah, wow. So, and what style were you teaching then?
That was in karate and kickboxing, because I was sort of at that time I was messing about with a few different styles, trying to find what suited me, and I was in that unfortunate world where some people get, where I've been training and competing in karate to a reasonably high level, but then I was getting penalised for striking too hard. But then when I was training in full contact kickboxing, I was finding that pulling the punches and hitting for points was actually counterproductive as well. So it was in that middle ground where I had to decide which way I was going to jump. So I was in that time where I'd been conditioned to strike for a points format, which means you pull your punches, you don't actually punch through the target. And so the idea with that is that, you know, it's quick, it's very fast maneuvering, but there's no real impact to the strike. And then when you get into full contact stuff, obviously the range is different, the time is slightly different, and the way you deliver the strike is different. And so I found that I was getting penalised in both camps because muscle memory was playing havoc with both sides, and I found I couldn't keep a foot in both worlds. So so it was during that time where I had to make a decision as to which way I was going to go.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a problem. And as well, just this morning I was talking to Ellis Amder from the US, and he was talking about studying multiple very traditional systems, ancient systems at the same time, and the struggle he went through to try and keep both pure the two, and doing a hybrid in the same time, doing neither. So it is a challenge. I mean, for those of us, all of us that cross train, have to make a decision about whether we want to have our own unique personal blend, or if we want to honor the two unique bodies.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean, in all honesty, for me, it became it actually turned out to be a very easy answer for me, and I don't say this to dismiss any style or system or anything because I don't, because just because I couldn't make it work for me doesn't mean it doesn't work. I'm aware that I'm not actually that good in the grand scheme of things, and there are people far better. But for me, the decision was simple, and it went along the lines of, well, if I'm working in security, if I'm working on the doors, if I'm working in a situation where there's a very real consequence to messing it up, I need to have the most effective skills. And that
yes.
was it, was that simple. And so basically I at that point I started getting rid of the stuff I didn't need and focusing far more on finding the things that were going to be effective for me and my shape and my size and the role that I was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that filter of the immediate consequence of choosing the wrong system or the wrong techniques or the wrong training, it does clarify things quite easily. If you're not training just for a recreational pursuit or not just for an academic or I guess a cultural endeavor, it becomes quite simple about what works best for me and what am I going to use my limited training time on. So I think that's certainly makes it easier if that's your priority.
Yes. Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a very instant barometer. I mean, again, I try not to be negative about things, but sometimes it can't be helped given the martial arts world as a whole. There are quite a lot of fraudulent people out there claiming things are real when they're not, stuff like that. I mean, we don't need to go into that. Just YouTube it. There's plenty about.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, instead of spending a number of years following a guru or a master that says, oh, one day you'll understand, you're just not ready yet. Instead of that, what you actually got was a very real message back as to whether or not that worked. And if it didn't work, well, then you suffered the consequences and didn't do it again.
Yeah. And look, I think the history of the martial arts, not every system was designed to make a combat effective in 6 weeks. It was it was a long training process from the time someone was born into a warrior family and they commenced training at 6 or 7 years of age, and by the time they were 16 or 17, they were ready for the battlefield, and that you can train someone for a decade before they have to really be able to do it for real. Whereas most people start martial arts and expect to or have the desire to be safer immediately. So,
yeah, absolutely, yeah, and I think that is not just that's the issue. As in, some things do take long time to learn. Nobody, again, that's not denying that. But I also think a lot of the issue is the fact that the society where we live in is a now generation, and you can't train once a week at a very low level and spend the other 6 days eating cheeseburgers and sitting on your backside and expect to be a killing machine. It's not going to happen. And so a lot of the martial arts. It's not that they're not useful, because that's quite the opposite. They've survived thousands of years by being useful. I think it's more a case of how we apply ourselves to that training, and for the majority, people aren't willing to go through the mill to actually forge themselves into what could be achieved through that particular martial art. I would suggest that that's more the problem than the art itself.
Yeah, I have a chuckle every now and then. I'll see a thread in say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu forum or subreddit, and someone will say, "Oh, this so and so got his black belt in 3.5 years or 4 years. He can't possibly be legit." But if someone had got their black belt in 8 or 10 years, training 3 to 4 days a week, for an hour and a half each session, no one would question it. But someone who trains for 4 years and trains 2 or 3 sessions a day, 6 days a week, is doing 1.5 to 2 times as many training hours, and it gets called into question that he got his black belt quicker. So it's funny, as you say, it's what you put into it. If you're going to train like a maniac and you're going to have a strength and conditioning routine, and you're going to follow a diet, and you're going to study film, and you're going to read books, and you're going to live it, of course you're going to progress. It's same as any physical or human endeavor. The more time you put into it, the more you obsess over it, the faster you'll progress in it. So and I think that's why sometimes in this reality-based self-defense world, if we're still using that term, those of us that have come from door work or some elements of policing or even crisis intervention or in mental health and whatever, that tend to have a more well-rounded understanding, because for most of us it was our life for at least a period of it, and you have to immerse yourself in it, or else the consequences are severe.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And it's again, that's the barometer where you're testing these things under, and so it's very hard to be deceived because it's an instant feedback, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it can be fatal feedback. To be brutally honest, I mean, the first time I realised that putting a bit of ego in my voice might have got me followed home by some people that certainly had the connections to change my life. if they hadn't got bored halfway home, that made me question how I deal with people, especially because I was a 19-year-old kid and I was still living with my parents, and I was about to bring some bikies home with me. That was certainly an eye opener for me. But you now run a martial arts academy. I'm just curious, unpacking what we've talked about there. What do you find most of your students are looking for when they come and bring the flyer in or come in for a welcome? What are most of them looking for from you?
Well, again, that's sort of quite interesting because I've moved areas a few years ago, and that has had a consequence to my style of teaching and what I actually teach. So what I mean by that is, up until a few years ago, I lived in a urban large city in the UK that has quite a substantial amount of crime. It's got quite a lot of challenging issues within it. Like a lot of big cities, it's very much segregated by wealth and social standing. So, I mean, if you're in a position where you have a lot of money, you can be behind your big walls and your big gates and live in your posh area. Whereas if you unfortunately don't have that, then you are, penned in like cattle, and everyone just ends up in this world where crime is rife, drugs is rife, violence is rife. In fact, violence is the commodity how most people get through the day. And so in that world, in that environment, people were looking to me for real skills, effective skills, and they would put themselves through the difficult training for that because they face that challenge every day. Whereas now I actually live in a small rural town that has a very, very low crime rate. There's a lot less of that sort of thing going on. So now we're back in the realms of it's more a hobbyist kind of thing. The majority of people live in a bubble where it's, hey, it won't happen to me. Now we all know that bad things happen to good people all the time. But because they're in that bubble and they don't have to deal with it daily, they don't want that kind of difficult training. They don't want to address the very difficult psychological aspects of it. So there's so my gym is a kind of mixture of what you would call sort of traditional sporting, kickboxing, stand-up striking kind of martial arts, where we teach a lot of good life skills and things, and the kids get some skills. But then we've got layers. So you've got the guys that want to do sport, you've got the guys that want to just do fitness and and just tell the mates at the office they do a bit of martial arts, and then you've got another tier of the guys that actually want to learn it in depth and actually want to ingrain those skills into them. And so it's a bit of a tiered system. I suspect most gyms are like that, truth be told.
Yeah, I think that even in the bad areas, you'll still find those that are naive and would be just as at home doing Pilates, kickboxing hybrid versus actually training for violence. So it's
yeah. Well, I do a number of online things now as well. So I've got some online courses out and things like that, and I do a lot of the seminars. I've just recently done a few of the bigger ones in the UK now over the past few weeks, and so I touch base with a lot of people around the country that are more inclined to my way of looking at things because there is a need for that, a necessity for that, and there are people that actually want to source that information. And so so even though they aren't necessarily on my doorstep, from a wider community, there are people that come to me and sort of and listen to what I have to say, although they may not physically be in my gym.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a positive, and I think with our very interconnected world now, it's very easy to find other people that are on the same path as you and to be able to collaborate. And this podcast is a perfect example of that. I mean, 10 years would have been very, very hard for me to be able to connect with everybody who's anybody in in this side of the industry, and now it's a matter of just adding them on Facebook and sending them a message and seeing if they're willing to talk to me. So it's certainly beneficial in that regard, and just the ability to distribute the information and distribute the findings is fantastic now. You don't have to have a marketing budget to get into Black Belt magazine and buy a full page ad to be able to buy the right to write an article and hope that somebody reads it and finds your school. You can now get the word out there quite easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say you're absolutely right. I mean, there's the wonders of social media and the internet and the things that it's done. It's been incredible, as you say. The fact that we're chatting now like that is a prime example of that. Is it's not all pictures of somebody's dinner and cat videos, is it? It's a great it's a great way to not only connect with the wider martial arts community and other people. It's also a great way to police it as well, because again, we're not. We're moving away now from that world where you've got insular groups that are claiming that this is too deadly for anyone else, because that information is now in the public, and it will get it will get critiqued and it will get brought up on, and I think to be fair, that's a good thing for the wider community as a whole, because we can now access learning so much easier. I mean, literally at the click of a button, I can get experts in almost all martial arts up on my screen in front of me, and I can actually interact with them on a one-to-one level in the most cases. So it's a fantastic tool, and for people that are sort of my age, I don't think for people that aren't my age, for the younger generation, I don't think they realize quite what a fantastic opportunity this time is for them with regards to learning.
Oh, absolutely. I tell people all the time now that there's no excuse for not knowing something now. I mean, literally all of humanity's findings of the past 5,000 years are literally in your pocket. There's anything you want to know about absolutely anything you can find out. It's only a matter of how good you are at sifting the data that comes back. It's crazy to think about. And it is funny that we take it for granted too. Like just before, we're having connection issues, and part of me is getting frustrated that I have a signal issue at this time of night, and I take a step back and think, well, actually, I'm talking to someone who's on the other side of the planet via a satellite that's in space. It's a pretty phenomenal achievement that I can just whip out my phone and have a backup signal ready to go.
No, absolutely, that's it. Yeah, we forget sometimes, don't we? We do. We've normalized it so much now. I think we do forget the absolute miracles that are in front of us on a daily basis.
Yeah, and look, that ties back into what we're talking about with violence as well. I mean, the fact that people are allowed to be naive about violence is kind of a strange evolution in humankind. I mean, we go back 4 or 5 generations. How many of our ancestors do you think never had a scrap? It's unlikely. So it's a very that we've had civilized society. Where we haven't had to, where people don't have, people have full-blown sympathetic nervous system activations and full-on meltdowns over traffic, and you imagine trying to explain that to your ancestor who lived 600 years ago, that the most stressful thing that's happened to you this month is that you were late for a meeting. It's crazy.
Or the fact that there are many people in this world pretending violence for self-gratification and titillation.
Yeah. Actually, one of my favorite interviews was Matt Thornton being interviewed. I think it may be an interview he did with Sam Harris, which is certainly worth looking up. But Matt basically said the more you fetishize something is basically indicates your level of maturity with the subject. So for kids and teenagers, they fetishize sex because they're not mature with the subject. They don't really know it. It's a bit of a mystery, and therefore it becomes this big thing. And we do the same thing with violence. The less exposure we have to it, the more we fetishize it and make it we end up with groups of overweight civilians training in camouflage and pretending to be special forces killers, and when anyone who's actually walked the walk goes, these guys are just playing dress up. Because the more familiar you are with something, the less you have to dress it up. You just look at it and go, well, that's real, or that's not, or that's got value, or that doesn't.
Yes. No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But it's again, I suppose it's part of a wider condition, isn't it? I mean, we could talk about that all day long, but I think it's suffice to say that you're right in the sense that anybody that's got any real knowledge on this particular subject understands that it's not sexy, it's not romantic, it's not fun, and it sure as shit isn't something that you want to actually try and court. Anybody that's done it for any length of time actually tries to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it sometimes you have to have your fill first. I mean, I went actively looking for it for a number of years, and now I have no taste for it whatsoever. Some people do it for a lot longer than I did, and some people have their fill after one incident. So I guess it's a personal thing as to when that occurs for you. But
but as we already talked about that, it's the motivation, isn't it? It's the reasons why. I mean, if you talk about, as I said a minute ago, if you talk about a young man growing up in a very urban, impoverished environment, then they learn quite quickly that not only is violence a weapon, but it's a commodity. They can trade with it. They can use it to gain things, whether that be status or physical things. So they understand that. For you and I, our motivation was more about knowledge. Can we put to use what we've learned? The things that we've been practicing, will they actually work when we require them to? So our motivation was slightly different. So that would change the timelines, and that would change how we move forward with that.
Absolutely, yeah, 100% agree. And I want to cut off before I get hate mail from anyone who trains in camouflage. You're all special. I know have all the time of the day for you, and I'm more than happy to interview whoever your master is that dresses in camouflage. That's perfectly fine by me. I'm also I've got friends that do historical European martial arts that dress up in full regalia, and look, they have a great time. But every single not a single one of them thinks they're training for a longsword duel at the ATM. They all recognize they're doing it as a hobby because it's fun and they enjoy the cultural aspects. So if you're doing something if you're doing something for fun and because you enjoy the cultural aspect and you enjoy the camaraderie, then by all means dress however you like.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I actually did the full contact medieval knight fighting for a little while there. So I actually dressed in full armor, full actual armor. So not the reenactment armor that's very light and fluffy. Actual physical proper armor that could withstand the blows. And I actually fought in the full contact medieval fighting there with broadswords, axes, all that kind of thing. It was huge amounts of fun. They're all mad as hatters. I mean, they're all proper nutty that do it. But again, they're not in any way pretending that that's going to give them a skill set for now. What they're saying is this is a very brutal, dangerous thing that we're doing, and we have a great deal of fun with it, but we do it as a hobby for pleasure. And so, yeah, absolutely right. And I think the same applies with the majority of people that are doing that kind of thing. I mean, there's the crossover of skills required are firstly, they're minimal, and secondly, the training required to actually ingrain those to be useful is not a level that the vast majority of people are willing or able to go to.
Absolutely, man. And look, I'm certainly not standing on any pedestals here. I spend the majority of my training time at the moment doing judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu because I enjoy it, and I've got no illusions that the 2 hours a week I spend doing group fighting that is only relevant to competitive judo rules is of any benefit whatsoever really in a street altercation. But I do it because I enjoy competing in judo competition. I want to maximize my success. So that's no more or less valid than someone swinging a sword at somebody or drinking camouflage. It's fun. That's totally fine. Just be honest about your motivations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, because I do occasionally rub people up the wrong way. I don't do it intentionally, but in the same vein, I have to sort of sometimes prick at pomposity when I see it. And so, my particular opinion is that everybody has skills, and all these different things have skills, but it's knowing where that skill set ends. So it's understanding that if you have to wear a specific type of outfit to perform those skills, it may not be the right answer. If you're in jeans and a t-shirt in the street, if you practice your art in bare feet, that may not be the answer. If you're in your heavy work boots or a pair of stilettos on a Saturday night out, and so they all have really good skills that can be used, and they can be moved from one environment to another. But it's just understanding that they all also have limitations, and I think that's really the issue with that. Not that they're not good skills; it's just the fact that some people struggle to understand that they all have a limitation to how they can be applied.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's look. I think someone who trains is usually going to be better off than someone who doesn't train, no matter what they train in, provided they're mentally prepared. And I think that's the key. I'll just do because we haven't really talked about it a great deal. I'd just like to touch on how you went about writing your first book, and what sort of motivated you to write your book, and if you can give everyone a bit of a spiel about what it's about, and just tell us the story a little bit.
Hey, well, the first book was called Modern Samurai, a revealing look at the private security industry, and that was essentially a bunch of stories about my time working on the doors as a bouncer, as a debt collector, as a close protection officer, bodyguard, that sort of thing. And so it's just a number of stories from that. Now, what basically happened was I had this urge to write, and unfortunately, with the education that I had, which was limited at the time, I have since then, as we've already discussed, tried to educate myself with the information that's available. So I had this urge to write, and so I started writing it, and then I sort of talked myself out of it. And I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough. Who the hell do I think I am that people are going to be interested? All the things that we tell ourselves. And I made the mistake of listening to those voices there for a while. So I put it to one side. I sat on it for a few years, but people kept asking me. I kept getting conversations with people, and it was two real main things. The first was people seemed genuinely interested in what I was doing and how I was doing it, but then also there was the side of it where a lot of people had misconceptions as to what the role involves. So a lot of people will look at a bouncer, a doorman, and they will think idiotic thug that can't get a proper job, or somebody that just likes hurting people, when in actual fact, in the majority of cases, that's not the issue. So I also wanted to redress the balance a little bit, and try and present some information that actually said, well, look, these guys are just average people, just like you or I. They have a family, they have kids, they're doing it for whatever reason. So whether that be paying themselves through university, whether that be topping up their income so that the kids can have a slightly better life, whatever the reason is, they're human beings just like sort of everyone else. And so I wanted to get that across. And there's already enough hard man books out there, and I'm certainly not dismissing those, because some of those books are very, very well written and good. But there's enough there's enough books out there of people going, oh, how I beat this guy up, how I beat that guy up, how I done that, and I didn't want it to be another one of those. So I do actually say on the cover, although there's violence in the book, because there is, it's part of the job, that's not the thing that I'm focusing on. And I never claimed to be a hard man. Yes, I'm 6'2", 17, 18 stone. Yes, I have done martial arts for 40 odd years. Yes, I have done this, that, and the other, but that doesn't make me a hard man. I have some skills, but that's not the same thing. So the book really just wanted to reflect all of those sort of things. And then when I released it, I was just overwhelmed with positive reactions from people. It hit number one in its category twice. I had an awful lot of people giving me really good feedback, and a lot of people within the industry as well, people that I admired and looked up to, were saying, well done, you've really sort of written that well. And that was amazing for somebody, as I say, that came out of school with next to nothing. That was, for me, quite an achievement. But not in a sort of self-congratulatory kind of way, just in a well, look, what else? How else can I push the envelope? How else can I change my world? In what other way can I make the universe accept me as a different person? And so that's where that was really interesting, because it changed my outlook on how I viewed the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tremendous achievement. I mean, I do believe the cliche that everyone has a book in them. It's just a matter of whether we actually sit down and write it and believe in ourselves enough to get it to fruition. So the fact that you even got it out and then got the praise that you did, and I'm certainly on my wish list. I'm looking forward to sitting down and reading it proper. So well done on that. So, and you've just released a second book as well. So let's talk about that one as well.
Yeah, sure. So this one now that's just been released is called "My Journey Up the Mountain: The Road to Black Belt," and that's more with regards to my martial arts journey itself. Because although I touched on that in the first book, that was more predominantly security related. So this one talks more about the different sort of things that I looked into with martial arts, the reasons why, and I go a little bit more into my history and stuff. And again, it was just one of those where I found that I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed the process of writing, and I'm still doing now. I'm doing other books as well, even as we speak. So I found that I actually really enjoy the process of it all, and I find that telling these stories is actually really good for me as well, as in sort of reminding myself not only sort of where I came from and why I do the things I do, but it also brings back that me then, with my students now. So as an example, when I talk about the very first time when I stepped into the very first dojo and I met my very first training partner, and the nerves I felt and the fear I felt and the whole craziness of the overwhelm of smelling the smell, seeing the sights, it looked like a movie set. And all that feeling that I had, it brings it right back to me in the now. And then when I greet a new student at my club, I can very easily draw on that and remind myself how that person must be feeling, or a little bit of how that person's feeling, which I hope helps me to be a better instructor and a better teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's yeah, so certainly good to reground yourself in those former experiences and remember where you were in your life at that particular point, and where others might be that aren't as far along the journey as you are. That's excellent. All right, Matt, we talked a little bit offline just about some actionable tips, and because of your background, I'd like to ask you two questions. So the first question is to do more from a managing violence point of view. You overcame a violent childhood, and I know
Mhm.
you now teach children as well in your dojo. What advice would you have for parents that are trying to help their kids that might be dealing with bullying or some other form of abuse? Do you have any advice you'd give to parents dealing with younger children?
Yes, my advice would be, well, actually, it would be unusual in the sense that it isn't necessarily martial arts related. I would say to them first and foremost to just accept the fact that the way they feel is actually how they feel and it's very real to them. And so my suggestions would be firstly try and find like-minded people, try and find people that like the same things they have. So they build, if you like, they build their own little community. Having friends, having people to talk to, having people to reach out to is really vitally important, so that they're not sort of alone and they're not cut off from everybody else. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be to try and find something that they're good at and help them to achieve that, because confidence, which is what you mentioned earlier, confidence is far more important than physical ability to fight, in the sense that if somebody has the confidence to face the world, they won't find themselves in those situations anywhere near as often. And so anything that's going to build confidence, anything that's going to help that young person to feel confident in themselves, to become self-confident, and allow them to to greet the world with a confident manner, so that they can deal with anything that comes along. So those would be sort of my two main recommendations, and they're I wouldn't say easy fixes, but they are things that you can quite easily accommodate, in the sense that it's not hard to find something that your kid enjoys doing and encourage them with that.
Yeah, that's really good, and like you said, it's it's not a martial arts answer, and again, if you hadn't had the life you'd had, then if you're just a martial arts instructor and someone asked you how do I deal with a bully, you probably would have given a martial arts answer. But having been there, done that, your answer is actually a lot more evolved in terms of what's actually going to help. So I appreciate that. That's excellent. Uh, so the second question I had for you, just in relation to a guy who's done a lot and continues to do a lot. How do you go about disciplining yourself to get the books written and to get stuff done?
Well, that's just prioritizing time and energy, and finances and everything else. I mean, it's basically just creating a pathway to the goal. So literally what I tend to do is I think that's what I'd like to achieve. How am I going to make that happen? And again, it doesn't matter how stupid it is. This is something that I really want people to sort of to take. If they're going to take anything, I'd like them to take this, because every time I've done something, I've been poo-pooed all the way, So, when I first started training, I'd have friends and family saying, "Oh, you'll never be a black belt. You'll never be any good at martial arts." Lo and behold, I became a multiple black belt in various disciplines. And then I'd have people saying, "You'll never become a world champion. You'll never be any good at martial arts." Boom, actually, I hold multiple awards and that sort of thing, and national championships and stuff. So I did that. And then it was like, "Hey, you're going to be rubbish as a bouncer. You're not be no good at that. What do you want to do that for?" And it turns out not only was I good at it, it paid for my life for many, many years, and I actually excelled at it, and then went on to teach other people how to do it well, and still do. And so that just followed suit. So instead of listening to the naysayers, and instead of listening to people say you can't do that just because they couldn't do it, I find it much more beneficial to say, well, this is the goal I want to reach, whatever that goal is. And as I said, it doesn't matter how stupid it seems to other people, because they're not relevant in this conversation. It's a conversation you have with yourself, and you say, right, okay, I want to do this. So in this instance, it would be writing the book. Okay, so instead of saying, I want a book and sticking it on a vision board and pinging it on my wall and doing nothing towards that, because that's not going to get it achieved, what I actually did was said to myself, right, okay, that's what I want. How do I do it? And so I forced myself to sit down and write 2,000 words every day. Okay, so 6 days out of 7, I would write 2,000 words every day. It doesn't matter if it was rubbish. If it was rubbish, I just, metaphorically screw it up, start again. But I would write those 2,000 words every day, and I would make sure that I did that religiously. I would parcel off time, switch off the phone, switch off everything, yeah. And I would also then make sure that I was learning. So I would be, YouTubing how to publish a book, how to write a book. I would be watching interviews with other authors. I would be trying to communicate with other authors, other people that have written, people that have done it. So instead of paying attention to the naysayers, I would actually be actively seeking out people that have already done it, and then trying to blueprint what they do and follow that myself. So that, that's kind of the thing, is set yourself a goal, then work back as to how you're going to achieve it in bite-sized chunks, but then also try and find people who have already done that goal and listen and learn from them, and take what you can from them, because if somebody's done it once, it can be done again.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I've often found that it's very rarely someone who has done something that tells you can't do it. Nearly always people tell you can't do something, and people that they haven't done it themselves.
Absolutely right.
I've never met someone who's written a book who will tell someone they can't write a book. So if you want to know if you can do something, go ask someone who's already done it, and they'll give you some honest advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And just because, it's very important for people, I think, to have that sort of belief in themselves, especially if they don't come from a place where other people are going to sort of give them that belief. And it's always really, really empowering to find people who have done that before you, because there are many stories out there of people saying, "Oh, I can't achieve this because I started there, or I didn't have that, or that didn't happen right for me, or I've had a terrible start in life." There's all these people that will say these things, but there's also a raft of people out there that go, "I did this in spite of that. I did this even though I had a terrible start, or even though I didn't have the finances, or even though I didn't have the time." And those are the people to connect with. Those are the people that you want to sort of get involved with, not the ones that say it can't be done.
Yeah, 100% agree. All right, I think that's a good note to leave the conversation on, Matt. That was a nice conclusion. It's a real positivity to take people away on, which is I try to achieve in this podcast, but because of the subject matter, it doesn't always end in a positive fashion. But,
No.
Who would have thought that 2 rough-headed bouncers would leave you on a motivational pitch? That's nice.
Well, absolutely. I think, to be honest, my friend, I think if you, whatever adversity people go through, learning from it is the crucial aspect, isn't it? Repeating the same mistakes again and again is just, stupidity for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Matt, thank you very much for your time, mate. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and hope we get to do it again in the near future. For any listeners that want to know more about you, they want to purchase your books, or they might be local to you and looking for training, where can I send them?
Okay, well, the easiest place to go to is www.modernsamurai.online, and that will give you the links to the bulk of my things, including books, online courses, stuff like that. Obviously, there's Facebook, LinkedIn, all that sort of thing. Instagram, you can connect me on all of those, and I would love to hear from you guys.
Excellent. All right, Matt, thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the chat, mate. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you once again to Matt Stait for that interview, taking the time to have a bit of a chat. Apologies for the connection issues. I know my end was dropping out quite a bit. Working to rectify that for future episodes. So thank you if you stuck through it. And I hope you got all the value that Matt had to offer, even if my end was a little bit shaky. I fully encourage you to check out Matt's books. His first book, Modern Samurai, a revealing look into the world of the private security industry. And his second book, which has just been released, My Journey Up the Mountain, The Road to Black Belt. Both are an excellent read. Really encourage you to jump on Amazon, all the normal booksellers, and grab yourself a copy. All right, thanks very much to Matt, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you stick around for the next episode. It is a doozy. I'm not going to give too much away, but have a look out for episode 3 as a guest returns. All the best, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Managing Violence podcast. For more information, to view previous episodes, or to read blogs, articles, and so much more, please check out my website at www.joesaunders.com.au. That's www.joesaunders.com.au. Thank you. Talk to you next time.